Okay, this is going to be just a summary video of what we've been doing in class with end behavior and multiplicity and graphing and all that stuff. I know some of you still look a little confused, so I wanted to take time to make a video so that you can watch this and hopefully it'll make more sense the more you watch it. Okay, so we're just going to do two examples. Alright, so whenever you're talking about any of this stuff, the idea is that you want to be able to sketch a picture of the graph just given general knowledge of the function. Alright, so knowing all the vocabulary like degree, end behavior, zeros, multiplicity, those aspects and characteristics will help you to get a mental picture of what the graph looks like, and then we can sketch a picture of what the general shape should be. Okay, so all of this is just to help us sketch and get an idea of what's happening on the graph. Alright, so we always start by saying, what is the degree? Because that tells us a lot of information. It tells us what the shape should most likely look like. It tells us how many intercepts we should probably have. And it also tells us whether it's an odd and even function. Alright, so looking at this one, I have an x here, but it's being squared, so that means I have two x's. Then I have one more x, so my degree is 3. So that makes it a cubic function. Okay, I know that because degree 3 is cubic. So at the shape of this graph, it's also negative, so that means it's going down. So the shape of the graph should be something like this. Okay, it should start up and end down, which tells you your end behavior. So if I do my left end behavior, because I know it's cubic and it's reflected because it has a negative, I know that y is going to actually approach positive infinity from the left. Okay, the right end behavior, y is going to approach negative infinity because it's going down over here towards the bottom to negative. Okay, that tells me this. Now this is a sketch of this function. However, we have a little more information, so we need a little bit better sketch than just doodling. Okay, so the next step is to figure out the zeros. Now the zeros are the same things as the roots, same things as the x-intercepts. They all mean the same thing. It's when it crosses 0. And we've learned that what we're doing to get that is setting everything here equal to 0. So I could say x minus 2 squared has to equal 0, and x plus 1 has to equal 0. Alright, over here I'm square rooting. I get x minus 2 equals 0, so I know that it's x equals 2. Because of that fact, and the fact that anything equal to 0, you're just changing the sign, I can just go ahead and say this is x equals negative 1. Okay? So to get a 0, you switch the sign of the thing in the parentheses. Now, once you have the zeros, you have a better understanding what your graph's going to do. So I can go ahead and start sketching the information onto my graph. It's going to cross at negative 1, and it's going to cross at 2. Now I need to figure out what's going to happen. Is it going to cross the x or is it going to bounce at the x? And that's determined by the multiplicity. So multiplicity is how many times the number or the root occurred in the original function. So 2, because it was squared, it's actually occurring twice. So the multiplicity is 2. Negative 1 only occurred once, so the multiplicity is 1. Now this should make sense, because if it's even multiplicity, it bounces. If it's an odd multiplicity, it crosses. So let's think about this in terms of our functions. If we just had x minus 2 squared, that's a parabola. It makes a bounce. A parabola has a bounce in it. If it was just x plus 1, it would be a line, so it would be straight and it would cross. Okay, that's how multiplicity works. It tells us whether it's going to bounce or whether it's going to cross. So now that I know all this information, I can sketch my graph. I know it needs to start up top, so it's going to come down, and it's going to reach negative 1, and it's going to cross because negative 1 only happens once. Then somehow I have to get back up to 2, so I can. It doesn't matter really how far down you go because we're not worried about that quite yet. It's going to bounce at 2, meaning it's going to make a parabola and go back down. Okay? So my end behavior makes sense. This is going to positive infinity. This is going to negative. At negative 1, I had a multiplicity of 1, so it should cross. So it crossed. At 2, it was squared. So if you notice, this is the shape of a parabola. Squared is a parabola, so it bounced at 2. Okay, so all this information, it's a lot of vocabulary, but basically just tells you what's happening on the graph. Alright, let's try a second example. here we have a little bit more complicated function. Let's check out what the degree is, because that's the most important aspect of all of this. What is the degree? So we have 1x here, we have 3 here because it's being cubed, and we have 1 here. So 1 plus 3 is 4, plus 1 more is 5. So it's a fifth. Okay? The overall equation, we're looking in front of the first parentheses, is positive. So it's positive. So if I'm thinking back to my little chart on my notes, my graph should look something like this. Because even though it's not cubic, it still has that shape, unless we figure it has something here could change, but the ends are going to stay the same. So that means that my left end behavior is y goes to negative infinity, opposite of the one we just did. My right end behavior, y goes to positive infinity. Okay, all that is talking about is the arrows. Which direction is the arrow pointing? Alright, we know our end behaviors. Now we need our zeros to know where it's going to cross the x-axis. All we do is change the signs of these numbers. So I'm going to have x equals -2, x equals -1, x equals +5. Then I need to look at the multiplicity. I'm just going to write an m. Alright? -2, it only happens once, so it has a multiplicity of 1, so that means it's going to cross. -1, there's a cubed right there, so it has a multiplicity of 3, but since it's still odd, it's still going to cross. Okay? X minus 5 has a multiplicity of 1, so it's going to cross. Alright? That is all the information we need to know in order to actually sketch a better picture than the one I've already sketched. Okay, so then you draw your picture. So first things first, graph the zero. So I'm going to have 1 at -2, a 0 at -1, and a 0 at 5. Okay? Now this graph, we said it was positive, so it should start down. All of 3 of these are going to cross. So it's going to be kind of like a little loop-de-loop, because they're all crossing, nothing's bouncing. So it's going to go up through the 2, back down through the -1, back up through the 5, and on to infinity. This one's going to negative infinity. Alright? So all of this stuff that we're learning, all it's doing is to give you an idea of the graph. And yes, I realize you could use your calculator, but it helps you to own what the graph is doing instead of just relying on your calculator. So that if you were to type it in wrong, you'd be like, wait, that doesn't make sense. I have a degree of 5. Okay? So that's what you're doing. So you find the degree. You find the, that's number 1. You find the left and right end behavior. Graph the zeros. Find their multiplicity. And then you're easily able to sketch the graph. Okay? If you're still confused, rewatch this video or come to tutorials